Now, we have our keynote address from the one and only Dr. Michael Greger again. I don't know if I want to read the entire, 2-page long bio, but we'll hit the highlights again, because if some of you weren't here for the first one, then we'll hit the second one. Okay, this is sponsored by Dr. Ezekiel R. and Edda Watkins-Stumpke Foundation. Dr. Greger attended Cornell Medical School of Agriculture for undergraduate studies, and then he went to the Tufts University of School of Medicine, where he graduated with his MD in 1999, specialized in clinical nutrition. He is a New York Times best-selling author of How Not to Die, How Not to Diet, and How to Survive a Pandemic. Dr. Greger is one of the founding members and fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and his work involves sharing nutritional facts through his nonprofit nutritionfacts.org website. Everyone, please welcome with a hearty round of applause, Dr. Michael Greger.
Surely, if there was some safe, simple, side effect-free solution to the obesity epidemic, we'd know about it by now, right? Well, I'm not so sure. It may take an average of 17 years before research evidence makes it into day-to-day clinical practice. To take one example that was particularly poignant for my family, as I mentioned before, heart disease. Dr. Dean Ornish published evidence in one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world that our leading cause of death could be reversed with diet and lifestyle changes alone, yet hundreds of thousands of people continue to die each year in the United States from what we learned decades ago was a potentially reversible condition. I had seen it, of course, with my own eyes, with my grandmother cured of end-stage heart disease by Nathan Pritikin. So I will skip over just since we are all here, skipped over the intro about nutritionfacts.org. All right, here we go. All right, so what does the science show is the best way to lose weight? If you want before and after pictures and testimonials, you have come to the wrong place. I'm not interested in anecdotes, I'm interested in evidence. When it comes to make decisions, is life and death important as to what to feed ourselves and our families? There's really only one question. What does the best available balance of evidence show right now? The problem is that even just sticking with the peer-reviewed scientific literature is not enough, as false and scientifically unsupported beliefs about obesity are pervasive even in scientific journals. The only way to get at the truth, then, is to dive deep into the primary literature and read all the original studies themselves, but who's got time for that? There are more than 500,000 scientific papers on obesity, with 800 new ones published every day. But that's what we do at nutritionfacts.org. We come through tens of thousands of studies every year, so busy folks like you don't have to. And indeed, we uncovered a treasure trove of hidden data. Like today, I'll cover simple spices, proven in randomized controlled double-blind trials to accelerate weight loss for just pennies a day. But with so little profit potential, it's no wonder that these studies have never seen the light of day. The only profiting I care about, though, of course, is your patient's health. That's why 100% of the proceeds from all my books and speaking engagements, all is donated directly to charity. I just want to do for everyone's family what Pritikin did for my family. But wait, isn't weight loss just about eating less and moving more? Isn't a calorie just a calorie? Well, that's what the food industry wants you to think. The notion that a calorie from one source is just as fattening as a calorie from any other is a trope broadcast by the food industry as a way to absolve itself of culpability. Coca-Cola even put out an ad emphasizing this one simple common sense fact. As the current and past chairs of Harvard's nutrition department put it, this central argument from industry is that the overconsumption of calories from carrots would be no different than the overconsumption of calories from soda. I mean, if a calorie is just a calorie, why does it matter what kind of foods we put in our mouth? Well, let's explore that example of carrots versus Coca-Cola. Now, it's true, in a tightly controlled laboratory setting, 240 calories of carrots, 10 carrots, would have the same effect on calorie balance as 240 calories in a bottle of soda. But the comparison falls flat on its face out in the real world. You could chug those liquid candy calories down in less than a minute, but eating 240 calories of carrots might take more than 2.5 hours of constant chewing. It's actually been tested. Not only would your jaw get sore, but 240 calories of carrots, that's like 5 cups. You might not even be able to fit them all in, right? Our stomach is only so big, right? We have, when we fill it up, we have stretch receptors in our stomach, which tell us when we've had enough. But different foods have different amounts of calories per stomachful. Some foods have more calories per cup, per serving, per mouthful, per pound than others. This is the concept of calorie density. The number of calories in a given amount of food. Now, as you can see, oil is the single highest calorie density food, meaning it has a high calorie concentration in just a small space. So, drizzling a tablespoon of oil on a dish adds 120 calories, more than 100 calories. For those same calories, you could have instead eaten a couple cups of blackberries, for example, a food with a low calorie density, right? So these two meals actually have the same number of calories. I mean, you could swig down that spoonful of oil and not even feel a difference in your stomach. But, eating a couple cups of berries could start to fill you up. That's why, yes, biochemically, a calorie is a calorie, but getting calories from different foods in different forms can have these different effects. For example, the average human stomach can expand to fit about 4 cups of food. So a single stomach full of strawberry ice cream, for example, would max out our caloric intake for the entire day. Now, to get those same 2,000 calories from strawberries themselves, you'd have to eat 44 cups of berries. So that's like 11 stomachfuls, right? So as delicious as berries are, I don't think I could fill my stomach to bursting 11 times a day. So, some foods are just impossible to overeat, right? They're so low in caloric density that you couldn't even physically fit in enough to even maintain your weight. So that's why, in a lab, a calorie is a calorie, but in life, far from it. Traditional weight loss diets focus on decreased portion size, but these eat less approaches leave people feeling hungry, unsatisfied. A more effective approach may be to shift the emphasis from restriction to positive eat more messaging of increasing the intake of healthy, low-calorie density foods, but you don't know until you put it to the test. Researchers in Hawaii tried putting people on more of a traditional Hawaiian diet with all the plant foods they could eat, unlimited quantities of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and the study subjects lost an average of 17 pounds in 21 days. Calorie intake dropped 40%, but not because they were eating less food. They lost 17 pounds in 3 weeks eating more food, in excess of 4 pounds of food a day. How could that be? Because whole plant foods tend to be so calorically dilute, you could stuff yourself without gaining the same kind of weight gain. They lost 17 pounds in 3 weeks eating more food. That is why, in my book, How Not to Diet, which I'm very excited that is out there, and be happy to sign copies for anybody. That's why low in calorie density is on my list of the 17 ingredients for an ideal weight loss diet. Since Americans average about 3 pounds of food a day, if you stuck with mostly these foods, you could see how you could even eat more food and still shed pounds. Vegetables are the winners here, lowest calorie density. So researchers at Penn State decided to put it to this test. Study subjects were served pasta and told to eat as much or as little as they wanted. On average, they consumed about 900 calories of pasta. Okay, now what do you think would happen if, as a first course, they ate 100 calories of salad, composed largely of lettuce, carrots, cucumbers, celery, and cherry tomatoes? Okay, would they go on to eat the same amount of pasta and end up with a 1,000-calorie lunch? 900 plus 100, or would they eat maybe 100 fewer calories of pasta, kind of effectively canceling out the added salad calories? It was even better than that. They ate 200 fewer calories of pasta. Thanks to the salad, 100 calories in, 200 calories out, right? So in essence, the salad had negative 100 calories, right? Preloading with vegetables can effectively subtract 100 calories out of a meal. Now, of course, the type of salad matters, right? Researchers repeat the experiment, but add the fatty dressing and put shredded cheese on top. Now, of course, eating this kind of salad as a first course didn't turn a 900-calorie meal into one with less than 800 calories. Instead, it turned it into a meal with calories in the quadruple digits. It's like, preloading, pizza with garlic bread or something. You just end up eating more overall. So what's the cutoff? Studies on preloading show that eating about a cup of food before a meal decreases subsequent intake by about 100 calories. So to get a negative calorie effect, the first course has to contain fewer than 100 calories per cup. As you can see in the chart, that includes most fresh fruits and vegetables, but having something like a dinner roll or something simply would not work. But give people a large apple to eat before that same pasta meal, and rather than consuming about 200 calories less, it was more like 300 calories less. So how many calories does an apple have? It depends on when you eat it. Before a meal, an apple effectively has about negative 200 calories. You see the same thing giving people vegetable soup as a first course. Hundreds of calories disappear. One study that tracked people's intake throughout the day found that overweight subjects randomized to pre-lunch vegetable soup not only ate less lunch, but deducted an extra bonus 100 calories off their dinner too, a whole 7 hours later. So next time you sit down to some healthy soup, you can imagine calories being veritably sucked from your body with every spoonful. Even just drinking 2 cups of water immediately before a meal gets people to eat about 20% less, taking it about 100 fewer calories. No wonder. Overweight men and women randomized to 2 cups of water before lunch and supper lost weight 44% faster. 2 cups of water for each meal, 44% faster weight loss. Why haven't we heard about this study? There's no money in tap water, so unfortunately, it never sees the light of day. But that's why this negative calorie preloading is on my list of weight loss boosters, basically all the things that can accelerate weight loss regardless of what you eat kind of the rest of the time. Anything we can put on that first course salad to boost weight loss even further? Well, in my Amping AMPK section, I talk about ways to activate an enzyme known as the fat controller. Its discovery is considered one of the greatest medical breakthroughs in the last few decades. We can activate this enzyme through exercise, fasting, and nicotine. Is there any way to boost it for weight loss without, sweat, hunger, or the whole dying horrific death from lung cancer thing? Well, Big Pharma is all over it. After all, Obese individuals are unwilling to perform even a minimum of physical activity, wrote a group of pharmacologists, thus indicating that drugs mimicking exercise are highly desirable. So it's crucial that we come up with compounds with high bioavailability to develop to safely induce chronic AMPK activation for chronic weight loss and maintenance. But there's no need to develop such a compound since you can already buy it in any grocery store, and it's called vinegar. In fact, we had some balsamic for lunch. When vinegar, acetic acid, is absorbed and metabolized, you get a natural AMPK boost. Enough of a boost to actually make any difference using, the amount one might get dressing a salad. Well, look, vinegar has been used, for centuries to treat obesity, but only recently has it been put to the test. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial on the effects of vinegar intake on the reduction of body fat in overweight men and women. Subjects were randomized to drink a daily beverage containing 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, or a placebo-controlled group drinking a beverage developed to taste just like the vinegar drink, but made with a different kind of acid, so it actually had no actual vinegar in it. 3 months in, the fake vinegar placebo group actually gained body fat, as overweight people tend to do over time, whereas the genuine vinegar group significantly lost body fat as determined by CT scan. A little covert vinegar a day led to pounds of weight loss achieved for just pennies a day without removing anything from their diet. That's why, and one of my 21 tweaks to accelerate weight loss is 2 teaspoons of vinegar with each meal, either sprinkled on a salad or even just added to tea with lemon juice or something. Critically important, we would never want to consume vinegar straight, as it can burn our esophagus. Now, the vinegar studies were nice because they're placebo-controlled. I mean, that's hard to do with food, right? I mean, you can't stuff a cabbage into a capsule, but some foods are so potent you can actually fit them in a pill to pit them against placebo, and that's spices. Want to know if garlic causes weight loss? No problem. Give people some garlic powder pills versus placebo pills, and garlic worked, resulting in a drop of waist and waistlines within 6 weeks. They used a half teaspoon of garlic powder a day, which would cost less than 4 cents if you go with the generic rate. 4 cents too steep? How about 2 cents? A quarter teaspoon of garlic powder a day. About 100 overweight men and women were randomized to a quarter teaspoon worth of garlic powder a day, or a placebo, and those unknowingly taking the 2 cents worth of garlic powder a day lost about 6 pounds of straight body fat over the next 15 weeks. Now, if you want to splurge and go up to 3 cents a day, there's black cumin. A meta-analysis randomized controlled trial shows weight loss efficacy, again, with just a quarter teaspoon a day. You say, wait, what is black cumin? You obviously have not been reading your Bibles. Described as a miracle herb, besides the weight loss, there are randomized controlled trials showing daily black cumin consumption significantly improves cholesterol and triglycerides, significantly improves blood pressure and blood sugar control, but I use it just because it tastes good. It's just a spice, right? You can put black cumin seeds in a pepper grinder and grind it on like black pepper. With more than 1,000 papers published in the peer-reviewed medical literature on black cumin, some reporting extraordinary results, like dropping cholesterol levels as much as a statin drug. Why don't we hear more about it? Why weren't we taught about it in medical school? Well, presumably because there's no profit motive. I mean, black cumin is just a regular, normal spice. You're not going to thrill your stockholders selling something that you can't patent that costs 3 cents a day. Or you can use regular cumin, which acts as an appetite suppressant. Those randomized to a half teaspoon of both lunch and dinner over 3 months lost about 4 more pounds and an extra inch off their waist, found comparable to the obesity drug known as Orlistat. For those of you who don't remember, that's the anal leakage drug. Though the drug company apparently prefers the term fecal spotting to describe the rectal discharge it causes, the drug company's website did offer some helpful tips, though. It's probably a smart idea. It's probably a smart idea to wear dark pants and bring a change of clothes with you to work. You know, just in case your drug causes you to crap your pants at work. I think I'll stick with the cumin. Thank you very much. Cayenne pepper can counteract the metabolic slowing that accompanies weight loss and accelerate fat burning as a bonus. Ginger powder, over a dozen randomized controlled trials, starting at just a quarter teaspoon of ground ginger a day, showing significantly decreased body weight at just pennies a day, proven in placebo-controlled trials to work, but we've never heard about these studies. My section on fat-blocking foods starts out with a command to eat your thylakoids, doctor's orders. What on earth is a thylakoid? Well, just a source of nearly all known life and the oxygen we breathe. Thylakoids are where photosynthesis takes place, the process by which plants turn light into food. Thylakoids are the great green engine of life, these microscopic sac-like structures composed of chlorophyll-rich membranes concentrated in the leaves of plants. When we eat thylakoids, like when we bite into a leaf of spinach or a little romaine like we had for lunch today, those green leafy membranes don't get immediately digested. They can last for hours in our intestines, and that's where they work their magic. Thylakoids bind to lipase. Lipase is an enzyme our body uses to digest fat. So you bind the enzyme, you can slow fat absorption. If all the fat is eventually absorbed, though, like what's the benefit? Location, location, location. There's a phenomenon known as the ileal break. The ileum, last part of the small intestine before it dumps into the colon, when undigested calories are detected that far down in our small intestine, our body thinks, oh my God, we must be full from stem to stern, and puts the brakes on eating more by dialing down our appetite. This can be shown experimentally. You insert a 9-foot tube down people's throats and drip in any sort of calories, fat, protein, sugar. You can activate the ileal break. You sit them down to an all-you-can-eat meal, and compared to the placebo group, who just got a squirt of water down the tube, they eat over 100 calories less. They just don't feel as hungry. They feel just as full, eating significantly less. That's the ileal break in action. This can then translate into weight loss. Randomize overweight women to a diet filled with green plant membranes. In other words, they just slipped them some powdered spinach. And you get a boost in appetite-suppressing hormones. In fact, the same kind of hormones these new classes of anti-obesity drugs work off of. A decreased urge for sweets. So yes, spinach can cut your urge for chocolate significantly down. After 7 hours after eating spinach, you're like, chocolate? Got any more spinach? Look at that. And boom, accelerated weight loss. All thanks to eating green, the actual green itself, the chlorophyll-packed membranes in the leaves. Now, the researchers used spinach powder just so they could create convincing placebos, but you can get just as many thylakoids eating a half cup of cooked greens, which is what I recommend people eat at least 2 times a day in my daily dozen checklist of all the healthiest of healthy foods I encourage people to fit into their daily routine, which was mentioned last time. It's available as a free app on iPhone and Android. You can kind of download it, have your patients just kind of follow along, and just try to inspire them to eat some of the healthiest foods. In the Journal of the Society of Chemical Industry, a group of food technologists argue that given their fat-blocking benefits, thylakoid membrane should be incorporated into functional foods as a promising new appetite-reducing ingredient, or you can just get it in the way nature intended. Now, though thylakoids eventually get broken down, fiber makes it all the way down to the colon. Now, while it's technically true that we can't digest fiber, that's only applicable to the part of us that's actually human. Most of the cells in our body are actually bacteria. Our gut flora, which weigh as much as one of our kidneys, as biologically, metabolically active as our liver, has been called our forgotten organ. And it's an organ that runs on MAC, microbiota accessible carbohydrates. So when you read that I tell people to eat a lot of Big Macs, don't get the wrong idea. MAC is just another name for prebiotics, which you heard about before, which is what our good gut flora eat. In other words, fiber. What do our good bacteria do with fiber? We feed them, and they feed us right back. They make short-chain fatty acids that get absorbed from the colon into our bloodstream, circulate throughout our bodies, and then even end up in our brain. That's one of the way our gut flora communicates with us, dialing down our appetite, all the while increasing the rate at which we burn fat, boosting our metabolism at the same time, all thanks to fiber. Check this out. Put people on a brain scanner and show them a high-calorie food like a donut, and the reward centers in their brains instantly light up. But if you repeat the experiment, but this time secretly deliver fiber-derived short-chain fatty acids directly into their rectum, you get a blunted reward center response. And the subjects report that high-calorie foods just seem less appealing and subsequently ate less of an all-you-can-eat meal afterwards compared to placebo. But fiber supplements like Metamucil don't work, which makes sense since Metamucil is non-fermentable, meaning our good gut bacteria can't eat it. So they can improve bowel regularity, psyllium, but can't be used by our good bacteria to make those compounds which can block our cravings. For that, we actually have to eat real food. What a concept. Our good bugs are trying to help us. But when we eat a food deficient in fiber, we are in effect starving our microbial selves. Less than 5% of Americans even reach the recommended minimum daily intake of fiber, as I mentioned before. No surprise, since the number one source of fiber is beans and whole grains, and 96% of Americans don't even reach the recommended minimum intake of legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, and 99% don't reach the recommended minimum intake for whole grains. Most people don't even know what fiber is. More than half of Americans surveyed think that steak is a significant source of fiber. However, by its very definition, fiber is only found in plants. There's zero fiber in meat, dairy, and eggs, typically little or no fiber in processed junk, and therein lies the problem. But wouldn't at least the protein in that steak fill you up? Well, surprisingly, even in this review, which was supported in part by the meat, dairy, and egg industries, acknowledged that protein intake does not actually translate into eating less later on. So subjectively, people report being full, but if you actually put it to the test and a few hours later see if they actually eat less of a subsequent meal, they don't. Whereas you give someone a fiber-rich whole grain for supper, and it can cut your calorie intake more than 12 hours later at lunch the next day. You feel full about 100 calories quicker the following day because by then your good gut bugs are feeding on that same bounty and dialing down your appetite. Today, even our meat can be considered junk food. For more than a century, one of the major goals of animal agriculture has been to increase the fat content of farm animals. Take chicken, for example, 100 years ago, the USDA determined that chicken was about 23% protein by weight and less than 2% fat. Today, chickens have been genetically manipulated through selective breeding to have 10 times more fat than protein, in fact. Chicken Little has become Chicken Big and may be making us bigger too. Meat consumption in general is associated with weight gain, but poultry appeared to be the worst. Even just like an ounce a day, which is like a single chicken nugget or one chicken breast like every 10 days, was associated with weight gain compared to eating no chicken at all. You know, it's funny when the meat industry funds obesity studies on chicken, they choose for their head-to-head comparators foods like cookies and sugar-coated chocolates. This is a classic drug industry trick where you try to make your product look better by comparing it to something, worse. Apparently, just regular chocolate wasn't enough to make the chicken look better. But what happens when chicken is pitted against a real control, like chicken without the actual chicken? And what happens is chickens out. Both soy-based proteins and corn, which is a kind of a plant-based meat made from the mushroom kingdom, was found to have stronger satiating qualities than chicken. Feed people a chicken and rice lunch, and 4.5 hours later, they eat 18% less calories at a dinner buffet than they would have if they had been given a lunch of, 18% more than they would have then compared to the chicken-free chicken and rice 4.5 hours earlier. And these findings are consistent with childhood obesity research that found that meat consumption seemed to double the risk of school children becoming overweight compared to the consumption of these plant-based meat products that I talked about earlier, whereas whole food sources of plant proteins such as beans did even better, cutting in half the odds of kids becoming overweight. So that's why I consider these kind of plant-based meats really as a stepping stone towards a healthier diet rather than the end goal ideal. Now, part of the reason that plant-based meats may be less fattening is they cause less of an insulin spike. A meat-free chicken like corn causes up to 41% less of an immediate insulin reaction. It turns out that animal protein causes almost exactly as much insulin release as pure sugar. Just adding egg whites to your diet can increase insulin output by about 60% within 4 days, and fish may be even worse. Why would adding tuna to mashed potatoes spike up insulin levels, but adding broccoli instead cut the insulin response by about 40%? Well, it's not the fiber, because if you give the same amount of broccoli fiber alone, no benefit. So why does animal protein make things worse, but plant protein make things better? Well, plant proteins tend to be lower in the branched chain amino acids, which are associated with insulin resistance, the cause of type 2 diabetes, prediabetes. You can show this experimentally. You give some vegans branched chain amino acids, you can make them as insulin resistant as omnivores, or you can take omnivores, put them even through just a 48-hour vegan diet challenge, and you see the opposite, significant improvements in metabolic health, again, within just 2 days of eating plants. Why? Because decreased consumption of of branched chain amino acids improves metabolic health. Check this out. Those randomized to restrict their protein intake were literally averaging hundreds more calories a day, so they should have become fatter, right? Well, no. They actually lost more body fat. Restricting their protein enabled them to eat more calories, while at the same time they lost more weight. More calories, yet a loss of body fat. And this magic protein restriction we're talking about, they're just having people eat the recommended amount of protein. So maybe they should have just called this the normal protein group or the recommended protein group, and whereas the group eating the more typical American protein levels and suffering because of it, the excess protein group. Given the metabolic harms of excess branched chain amino acid exposure, leaders in the field have suggested the invention of drugs to block their absorption to promote metabolic health and treat diabetes and obesity without reducing caloric intake. Or we can just try not to eat so many branched chain amino acids in the first place. Where are they found? They're found mostly in meat, including chicken and fish, dairy products and eggs, perhaps explaining why Animal protein has been associated with higher diabetes risk, whereas plant protein appears protective. So defining the appropriate upper limits of animal protein intake maybe offer a great chance for the prevention of type 2 diabetes and obesity, but it need not be all or nothing. Even an intermittent vegan diet may be beneficial. But if there's just one piece of advice that really best sums up the recommendations from my book on weight loss, it would be to wall off your calories. Let me explain what that means. Animal cells are encased only in easily digestible membranes, which allow the enzymes in our gut to effortlessly liberate the calories in a steak, for example. Plant cells, on the other hand, have cell walls, which are made out of fiber, which acts as an indigestible physical barrier, so many of the calories remain trapped. Now, processed plant foods, fruit juice, sugar, refined grains, even whole grains if they've been powdered into flour, have had their cellular structure destroyed. Their cell walls cracked open, and their calories are free for the taking. But when we eat structurally intact plant foods, chew all you want, you're still going to end up with calories completely encapsulated by fiber, which then blunts the glycemic impact, activates the ileal brake, and delivers sustenance to our friendly flora. So, bottom line, try to make sure as many of your calories as possible, your fat, your protein, your carbohydrates, right, are encased in cell walls. In other words, from whole plant foods. That's what nature intended. Millions of years before we learned how to sharpen spears or mill grains or boil sugar cane, our entire physiology is presumed to have evolved in the context of eating what the rest of our great ape cousins eat, and that's plants. The Paleolithic period, when we started using tools, only goes back about 2 million years. We know the great apes have been evolving since back in the Miocene era, it was more like 20 million years ago. Right? So for the first 90% of our hominoid existence, our bodies evolved on mostly plants. It's no wonder then that our bodies may thrive best on the diet we were designed to eat, so maybe we should go back to our roots. With enough portion control, anyone can lose weight. Right? Lock someone in a closet, force them to lose as much weight as you want. Right? Chain them to a treadmill, you get a very similar effect. Right? But what is the most effective weight loss regimen that doesn't involve calorie restriction or exercise or a felony? Well, I have scoured through the medical literature at all the randomized controlled trials, and the single most successful strategy to date is a diet of whole plant foods. The single most effective weight loss intervention like that ever published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, a whole food plant-based diet, works better than anything else been studied to date. I mean, we've known for 40 years that those eating predominantly plant-based diets weigh, on average, about 30 pounds less than the general population. But you don't know if it's the diet itself until you put it to the test. In 2017, a group of New Zealand researchers published the broad study, 12-week randomized controlled trial in the poorest region of the country with the highest rates of obesity. Overweight individuals were randomized to either standard medical care or semi-weekly classes offering advice and encouragement to eat a low-fat diet centered around fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And that's all it was, just empowerment with knowledge. No meals were provided. The intervention group was merely informed about the benefits of plant-based eating, encouraged to incorporate it into their own lives. No significant change in the control group, but the plant-based group, even without any restrictions on portions, and being able to freely eat all the healthy foods they wanted, lost an average of 19 pounds by the end of the 3-month study. Right? 19 pounds is a respectable weight loss, but what happened next? And at the end of those 12 weeks, class was dismissed, no more instruction was given. Well, the researchers were curious to see how much weight the subjects had gained back after being released from the study. So everyone was invited back at the 6-month mark to get reweighed. Now, yes, the plant-based group had left the study 19 pounds lighter, but after 6 months, they were only down 27 pounds. They got even better. The plant-based group had been feeling so good, both physically and mentally, had been able to come off so many of their medications that they were sticking with the diet on their own, and the weight continued to come off. What about a year later? I mean, even in studies that last a whole year, right? People who are coached to stay on a particular diet the entire time, and by the end of the year, any initial weight loss, typically, kind of in the first few months, tends to creep on back. The broad study only lasted a few months, yet after it was all over, those who had been randomized previously to the plant-based group not only lost dozens of pounds, they kept it off. There's not only the greatest weight loss at 6 and 12 months than any other comparable trial, that was months after the study was already over. Right? A whole food plant-based diet achieved the greatest weight loss ever recorded compared to any other such intervention published in the medical literature, by which I mean without portion control and without enforced exercise. You can read the record-breaking study in full for free at nature.com/article/NUTD2173, or just point your phone camera at the screen and pick off the QR code. Any diet that results in reduced caloric intake can result in weight loss. I mean, dropping pounds is not so much the issue. It really is about keeping them off. And a key difference between plant-based nutrition and more traditional kind of weight loss approaches is that people on plant-based diets are encouraged to eat ad libitum, meaning eat as much as they want, right? No calorie counting, no portion control. I mean, just eating, right? The strategy is to improve the quality of food rather than restricting the quantity of food. You put people on a diet packed with fruits and vegetables, whole grains and beans, and allow them to eat as much as they want, they end up eating about 50% fewer calories than they might have otherwise, just as full on half the calories. Say, wait a second. How can you keep people satisfied cutting more than 1,000 calories out of their daily diets? By eating more high bulk, low calorie density foods, the vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans, and fewer calorie dense foods like the meats, cheeses, sugars, and fats. But it may not just all be on the calories in side of the equation. Those eating more plant-based appear to effectively be burning more calories in their sleep. The resting metabolic rate of those eating more plant-based may be 10% higher or more, a boosted metabolism that can translate into burning off hundreds of calories more, extra calories without doing a thing. Right? Eating more plant-based, you burn more calories just living, just being, existing. So no wonder why those eating more plant-based tend to be slimmer. Start packing your diet with real food that grows out of the ground, and the pounds should come off naturally, taking us down towards our ideal weight. A questioner asked before about ketogenic diets. Body fat loss actually slows down when you switch to a ketogenic diet because the body starts cannibalizing its own protein. Just looking at the bathroom scale, though, the keto diet seems to be a smashing success, losing less than a pound a week on a regular diet to, boom, 3.5 pounds within 7 days after switching to keto. But what was happening inside their bodies told a totally different story. On the ketogenic diet, their rate of body fat loss was slowed down by more than half. So most of what they were losing was water, but they were also losing protein. They were also losing lean mass. This may help explain why the leg muscles of CrossFit trainees placed on a ketogenic diet can shrink as much as 8% within 2 months. I mean, exercise is supposed to make your muscles bigger, not smaller. Of course, even if keto diets worked, the goal of weight loss is not to fit into a skinnier casket. People whose diets even tend to trend in that direction live significantly shorter lives. On the other hand, even just drifting in the direction of eating more healthy plant foods is associated with living longer. Now, those going the other ways, those who start out plant-based, but then add meat to their diet at least once a week or more, not only double or triple their odds of diabetes, stroke, heart disease, and weight gain. They may suffer an associated 3.6-year drop in life expectancy. That's going from no meat to just once a week meat or more. Low-carb diets have been shown to impair artery function and worsen heart disease, whereas whole food plant-based diets have been shown to actually reverse heart disease. That's what Ornish used, as I talked about this morning. So what happens to be the most effective weight loss diet just so happens to be the only diet ever proven to reverse heart disease in the majority of patients. My grandma didn't have to die like that. Maybe no one's grandma has to die like that. Only one diet has been shown to do all that, a diet centered around whole plant foods. So we don't have to kind of mortgage our health to lose weight. The single healthiest diet also appears to be the most effective diet for weight loss. I mean, after all, permanent weight loss requires permanent dietary change. I mean, healthier habits just have to become a way of life. And if they're going to be lifelong, you want them to lead to a long life. Thankfully, the single best diet proven for weight loss may just so happen to be the safest, cheapest way to eat for the longest, healthiest life. Thank you. This December, I have a new book coming out on longevity, How Not to Age. If anyone's interested, you can pre-order it now. Of course, all proceeds from the sale of all my books donated directly to charity. But I'm super excited and be happy to answer questions about this or anything I covered today. Yes?
So you mentioned a lot of different spices like cumin and garlic. How are you getting those into people? Are they taking a capsule with their apple cider vinegar and water right before a meal? Or like, how are they implementing those?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's on me, thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, for example, part of my daily dozen checklist of all the healthiest of healthy foods I encourage people to fit into their daily diet, quarter teaspoon of turmeric. Encourage people, and there's these clinical trials showing these benefits of turmeric, wonderful, just plain normal spice. And quarter teaspoon sounds so little, but turmeric is powerful stuff. And, you know, that's what makes curry powder yellow, has this curry flavor, and some people just don't like it. But it's so important, I think, to try to fit turmeric into your daily diet that you can actually get turmeric capsules, not turmeric extract capsules, just one ingredient, just plain powdered turmeric root. You can buy it in capsules, of course, it's way more expensive just buying the bulk spice. You can make capsules your own if you have time. There's also, these little discs of transparent potato starch paper, one ingredient potato starch. You hardly see it. Bodybuilders use it a lot to take all sorts of crazy powders, and you put it in the center and you kind of wrap it up like a wonton, dip it in water, and you can swallow, teaspoons of different powders, and you don't taste it because it kind of coats the whatever. That's one way I've seen people do it. If you don't like the taste of these spices, black cumin is just kind of like black pepper. And so if you like black pepper, might as well just crack on black cumin. Unfortunately, God, in the new book, there's all sorts of new spices, like long pepper, which is in the black pepper family, which has these neat senolytic effects. That actually has a Szechuan-y kind of numbing pepper flavor, which, again, some people love, some people don't. So there are ways you can include these. I mean, like the weight loss study with the cumin showed all this extra body fat loss. That was a half teaspoon of cumin at lunch and dinner every single day. That is a huge, anybody know their cumin? That's a lot of cumin. You have to really like cumin. But look, if you love cumin, dump it in some hummus and wow, you have this great hummusy, whatever. But you can, actually buy all these things in capsule form. Again, not extracts, not some patented formula, no fillers, one ingredient, just the spice. So you can get ground ginger. I take it when I travel because I get travel sickness. Ground ginger, there's this rich literature about preventing nausea and vomiting from morning sickness and chemo, and you can randomize people against that versus Dramamine, and the ginger beats it out. So I get these ginger capsules. Could I mean, rather than, and so you can get most of these spices in capsule form. A lot of people don't like tasting pills. They taste good anyway, but you can also just take some ginger powder and put it in hot water, and that's like make ginger tea and just drink it down as a way to get ginger in your diet. Anyway, those are some thoughts.
I have a question. So I have a 2-year-old son who's like second percentile on the weight chart. And so we're kind of more of a plant-based family, but I'm worried about his caloric intake. What recommendations would you have for a patient?
Oh, yeah. We want calorie-dense food. So it's like doing the opposite of what we saw there. So nuts, seeds, nut butters, avocado, smoothies, kind of drive-through snacking throughout the day. They have such limited stomach capacity. We actually just have to, have the most concentrated sources of calories and nutrition, and may have to eat more frequent meals. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And some people lose too much weight, eating healthy, and again, they have to do the same kind of thing. They have to look at the calorie density scale, like what's the highest calorie density thing that I enjoy? And typically it's like nuts and seeds, or nut and seed butters. I mean, you can get a lot of calories packed in a very small space, and that may be able to help.
So if you embrace this kind of diet, does blending it have any kind of good or bad effect?
Does what?
Blending it, putting it in a blender.
Oh, yeah, fantastic question. So I'm a big fan of blending, but not juicing. So juicing, we're removing the fiber. Now, if you take that fiber after you juice fruits and vegetables and you add it back, so it's like you get some kind of, or make, carrot bread or do something with it, then fine. But unfortunately, people are throwing away the fiber. And a lot of people are like, the people who juice are really healthy and be like, fiber, I don't need fiber, I get tons of fiber. But actually, 80% of the polyphenol phytonutrients, which we ascribe many of the benefits of fruits and vegetables to, these polyphenols are actually attached to the fiber and only released into our system when our good gut bugs eat the fiber, release the polyphenols, then they actually absorb through our colonic lining and get into our bloodstream. And so by throwing away the fiber, we're actually throwing away 80% of those polyphenols in fruits and vegetables. And so that's why I really want to keep them now. But if you blend it, you throw everything in a blender, it's all there. In fact, you are breaking open those cell walls in a way that and getting all that nutrition. And you say, wait a second, didn't I just say we're not supposed to break open the cell walls? Well, what are we breaking cell walls open? We're breaking cell walls open to kale, the lowest calorie density, vegetables, the lowest calorie density foods. You can spill out all those calories, and there's nothing. You can eat a wheelbarrow full of kale, and you wouldn't even be able to maintain your weight.
But you had said earlier that part of the benefit of these cell wall nutrients is they get into the colon.
Yes, and so what? Right. So all the none of the fiber is lost, but what we are missing out is the starch that's encapsulated in those cell walls. But that's not what we find in fruits and vegetables. What we find, so that's why it's critically important in terms of our microbial health that legumes and whole grains are eaten as intact as possible. And so by eating not just oats, and not just whole oats, but oat, and not just like steel cut oats, which are like whole oat groats cut in 2 or 3, but actually eating oat groats. Takes longer to cook, but it's wonderfully chewy, delicious. You'll never go back. That's the way to do it, because then we're actually, our good gut bugs, the fiber feeders, don't just eat fiber, they eat starch too. Unfortunately, in modern diet, no starch ever makes it down to our colon. But we evolved getting all this, the starch down to our colon, because there's no such thing as powdering grains into a smaller particle size than the average cell diameter. So we're actually missing out on all that. So I encourage people to eat groats. I have a recipe for what's called brole, or this kind of prebiotic mix of different groats, which is great for gut health and also all the benefits of short-chain fatty acids. So it's less important with the fruits and vegetables because we would presume that those would be broken beforehand and we'd get that all absorbed.
I haven't got the reference, but a couple years ago I was listening to a podcast by a Harvard nutritionist who said that blending does some damage to the nutritional value of the fruit.
The downside, so I have a whole series of vegetables, of videos on smoothies, green smoothies. What the downside of smoothies is that you get an unnatural rush of the sugars. So, I mean, you take fruit, and the amount of time, normally it takes you a long time to eat like whole fruit. But if you, in a smoothie, I mean, you can just chug those liquid calories down such that you get an unnatural rise in your blood sugar, and that can lead to increased triglycerides, etc. So, all you have to do is drink that smoothie at the rate at which it would take you to eat the fruits and vegetables in the blender container, right? So you're basically just sipping the smoothie. So rather than chugging the smoothie, it's like, wow, that's a lot of fruits and vegetables. That would take me like 2 hours to eat that many fruits and vegetables. Okay, so I'm going to eat this big smoothie, drink this big smoothie through a straw, so I don't, hurt my enamel if there's really some sour fruits and vegetables or something. I'm going to drink it for over 2 hour period. I'm going to get to the bottom of that rather than chugging it down. This is for people who are insulin resistant, prediabetes, so they have that visceral adiposity, who may not be able to deal with powdered grains even if they're in whole form, or getting it's the kind of thing where you get with like fruit juice. You get a big sugar and insulin spike drinking fruit juice as opposed to eating an apple. Apple juice versus an apple, and it's not just a fiber effect. But
this physician indicated that there is some conformational change in some of the vitamins when you blend it.
A conformational change in vitamins
So
that I've never heard of. I mean, they're such kind of basic molecules. I'd be surprised if there's any. I mean, but I'd love to see that. I'd be interested in checking it out. Yes.
I noticed you didn't spend a lot of time on the GLP-2 agonists.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of semaglutide and tirzepatide and the other drugs?
Yeah, and so that was what I was mentioning before with the thylakoids. So the greens, so eating greens, the actual green, those chlorophyll packed membranes, you get that's the appetite controlling mechanism appears to be through that same digestive hormone that these new spate of obesity drugs are being sold under. And so greens are healthier anyway, so again, it's like, how can we profit off of this natural mechanism? We can kind of artificially induce the appetite controlling hormone, but there are healthier ways to do it.
Can you touch on nutritional supplements like beta-hydroxybutyrate, BHB, and also on intermittent fasting?
And then?
Intermittent fasting, like for 4 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
I actually have a section on BHB, the supplement, in the new book. I don't remember what I said, though. It has 13,000 citations. It's a big book. It took me a long time. But it's in there. In fact, if you email me all my contact information on Nutrition Facts, I'll send you the transcript from that section. I just don't remember. It covers so many supplements. But in terms of intermittent fasting, actually, in my How Not to Diet book, the largest chapter is on fasting. Because there's so many different types of intermittent fasting. There's alternate day fasting and 5-2 fasting and, fasting mimicking diets and time-restricted feeding, et cetera, And I go through the pros and cons of each versus, chronic caloric restriction. And the bottom line, it's kind of the spoiler alert bottom line, is that early window time-restricted feeding is probably the most beneficial, meaning cutting down your daily feeding window to 12 hours or less, but critically important, that window is earlier rather than later. So if you're going to skip any meal, you're actually skipping supper, not breakfast. And in general, we should try to shove more calories towards the morning because our body is better able to handle it. You give the exact same food in the morning, you actually put on more body fat than the exact same food, exact same amount given later in the day. You get more blood sugar spike. We were not meant to eat in the dark, and that's because of our circadian rhythms. I have a whole section on chronobiology, fascinating stuff. But the bottom line, early time-restricted feeding, we have all sorts of benefits, eating the same foods, but just getting more benefits from them.
Actually, my question is just about that. For night owls like me, we get cravings for sugar at night, and it's almost like two different people. Like during the day, I might be able to eat healthy, but then at night, when I'm up, that's when I want to eat all the sugar. And can you help explain that, and also like how best to address it, especially for people whose biorhythms are a little bit different than, the morning?
Yeah. In fact, I think today's daily video on Nutrition Facts, it talks about it talks about sleep, and one of the downsides of sleep deprivation actually is through this mechanism of people who are sleep deprived. You put people in a lab and have them do an overnighter, and in the morning, they're more likely to go for the pastries. They're more likely to go for the high-fat, sugary foods when people are tired. That's what they go to first, and so maybe that is actually why people who sleep shorter duration actually have appear to have worse outcomes as one of the potential confounders beyond just sleep as an indirect route. Some people, not just night owls, but some people literally working night shifts, and they got no choice. So I talk about some of the, in the chronobiology chapter, I talk about some of the kind of tricks you can use. It was built out of the kind of jet lag literature. It's like what you should do when you land, and you calculate how many hours, west you just traveled, and there's a graph, and I have a chart. In terms of when you should do light exposure. And I have a similar thing. He says when you should be eating meals, if indeed you have that, those kind of shifts. Ideally, you wouldn't. People who work night shifts have just terrible public health statistics, even controlling for all sorts of socioeconomic factors. We really weren't meant to do that kind of work. But of course, if we have no choice, there are ways we can mediate the impact through timing. But in terms of the cravings, it's, again, controlling your environment, having healthy food on you at all times. And so you're not going to the vending machine because, you got the sweet potato microwaved in your bag, or the kale chips, or the, whatever it is, where you can just easily snack on something healthier. So you're kind of never stuck in that situation where it's like, oh my God, I'm hungry, I'm stressed, and there's the vending machine,
Hello. There are influencers and other people that are social media will do certain types of things to their produce when they wash it, either conventional or organic. Yeah. They'll use baking soda, vinegar, sometimes both. I don't really know if there's any special data that can help if there's, if you wash your produce any certain way.
So it's critical from a food safety point of view to actually wash our produce under running water. And that is, the solution to pollution is dilution. And it's mostly because, who knows what body orifice someone picked before picking your berries and then ending up in the store. We want to wash our fruits and vegetables. But in terms of I think what you're referring to is like these different like pesticide washes. Like you can take this is how you get rid of pesticides. And so I was just kind of fascinated by it. And so I did a video talking about where they actually did experiments where they take baking soda and different concentrations of salt and blah, blah. And it turns out, yes, a 10% salt solution, actually you can remove some pesticides. But again, we're talking about just kind of minuscule risk versus the tremendous benefit. Anything that would dissuade someone, be like, oh God, now I gotta make a salt solution every time I want to make a salad. Not to mention the sodium that may be left on the. Oh God, that's all we need, right? And so basically, I say don't worry about it. But if you really want to, here's all the studies that have looked into the question.
I have a friend who asked me to ask you this, so I'll just take the opportunity.
A friend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, really.
Yeah,
Well, it's actually a great question because I'm oil-free now, but my family still uses oil, so it's actually a good question for my family members too. But my friends, and so yes, also myself. People who still use oil, might be extra virgin, organic maybe, but the question is, should they buy it pay 2 to 3 times extra to buy it in a glass jar, or are they okay to get away with the plastic?
Oh, interesting. So, as I mentioned in this talk, oil is the most calorie concentrated kind of food on the planet. Even butter has a little water in it, so it actually has fewer calories per serving. And so from a kind of calorie density standpoint, not great. It's kind of like, I think of oil as kind of like the table sugar of the carbohydrate kingdom. You take something really healthy, like a sugar beet, remove all the nutrition, you're left with just the sugar. Take something like a walnut, remove all the nutrition, you're left with like walnut oil. Still has some fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin E and stuff, but basically you've really stripped all the fiber away. And so in general, I'm all for eating, avocados and nuts and seeds. You can eat as high a fat of diet as you want, but I would like to get it from Whole Foods because it's a package deal. You get all those nutrients kind of packaged together. So that's kind of the primary. In terms of like glass versus versus plastic. I haven't seen anything. I mean, I do have videos about BPA, which is used in flexible plastics, probably not used in that kind of packaging. But one thing, there are these kind of toxic byproducts of some of the deodorizing they use to refine oils. Not something you see in extra virgin olive oil, something like canola oil or cottonseed oil or corn oil. You can imagine, well, you take something really like low fat like corn, how do you get oil out of it? You have to use these really kind of powerful chemical extraction techniques, and you get these kind of toxic byproducts. And actually a few trans fats in very low quantities, something we really want to minimize our intake of. The problem with kind of the extra virgin olive oil is unfortunately there's such mass fraud. I talk about a video where they looked at the top 5 brands of extra virgin olive oil, and they found that most of them, were mixed. You can tell chemically if they're actually extra virgin olive oil or not. And there's just kind of this mass fraud with it. Very similar to kind of seafood industry. There's just mass fraud of what seafood they're actually giving people. So it's actually hard to get extra virgin olive oil, even if you want to get extra virgin olive oil. But I talk about some of the benefits, certainly compared to some of the more processed oils.
I'll ask one more question. I heard you talk recently about the difference between miso and soy sauce on blood pressure.
Yeah.
I don't remember the details, and I don't know if you mentioned that today
Sure.
at any point, but I just thought.
No, happy to. So I have a series of cookbooks. There's the How Not to Diet cookbook, the How Not to Diet cookbook. I encourage people to check them out at their local libraries if you want to find some tasty recipes. I didn't want to just make every recipe healthy, including the desserts, but every single ingredient of every single recipe healthy. And so, wait a second, how do you make something sweet without sugar or salty without salt? Well, the salty without salt piece is by using miso, this fermented soybean paste, which has a high sodium content. And we say, wait a second, well, then we're worried about, stomach cancer, worried about high blood pressure. But the observational data was such that miso eaters, in Japan, they have a lot of miso. It's a typical breakfast food. Miso eaters did not have higher rates of stomach cancer like those who eat other sources of sodium, didn't have higher rates of high blood pressure. And so they actually put it to the test. And so you can randomize people to drink huge amounts of sodium worth of miso versus lower amounts of miso. And you actually find no bump in blood pressure, which you would get with any other source of sodium. And so they're not sure exactly what's going on. But so that's like a harmless way to get a salty taste in foods is to add some miso. And we're just not sure the mechanism, what about the fermentation process does whatever, but who knows?
Could you speak to the differences between fermented foods compared to their non-fermented counterparts, if there's any benefit at all?
Oh, yeah, so fermented foods, a perfect segue. The problem with most fermented foods is the salt that's added. So how do you make sauerkraut? You take, you take cabbage from the field, you put it in salt water, and poof, you don't have to add like probiotics or anything, just the natural probiotic bacteria found on the leaves out in the field of cabbage preferentially grow, and the salt keeps the growth of the bad bacteria. So you have good bacteria growing, and poof, you have sauerkraut. But unfortunately, that's how you make most of these fermented foods, by adding tons of salt. And sodium is the #1 dietary risk factor for death on planet Earth. According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, not only is the #1 risk factor for death of humanity, their diet, more than smoking, more than air pollution, more than anything else, but specifically, what's the worst thing about people's diets? So like #2 is inadequate fruit consumption, #3 is inadequate whole grain consumption, #4 I think is inadequate vegetable consumption, #5 is inadequate fruit and vegetable, inadequate nut and seed consumption. The 5 worst things about humanity's diet, 4 of which are not getting enough of something, and they're not getting enough whole foods. But the #1 is getting too much of something, and that is too much sodium. And that's because sodium contributes to death and disability through a variety of mechanisms. Contribute to kidney failure and heart failure and all sorts of things. So we really do need to decrease our sodium intake. That's where we see that hypertension data. And so if you absolutely love sauerkraut, you can put it in a strainer and just pour running water over it, get rid of a lot of that salt. But it's kind of hard to get rid of all of it. So if you kind of like the taste, you could put cabbage just in vinegar. it actually isn't fermenting, it's just kind of getting sour. But you do get the benefits of the vinegar, but you're not actually growing anything in there. Tempeh fermentation is not bacterial fermentation. It's actually a fungal mass fermentation. And there's benefits from that you get in eating mushrooms or something, particularly the ergothioneine, which has been termed a longevity vitamin by Bruce Ames, who's a famous biochemist, meaning that it's not a vitamin in the sense that you die if you don't get it, but if you don't get enough of it, it certainly constricts one's potential for a long, healthy life. Ergothioneine is produced by fungi. We used to get a lot in our crops because we had these little fungal networks, but now because of the way we do agriculture these days, we actually break those fungal networks. And so the only way to get ergothioneine these days is really to eat fungi, which is basically mostly mushrooms, but also tempeh. And also spermidine, which is I have a whole chapter in the new book on spermidine, and most concentrated form of spermidine is, again, tempeh, found concentrated in mushrooms, and that has a beneficial effect in terms of activating autophagy, this kind of health cleaning process, which helps with aging and longevity. Yes?
Yeah, if we keep you here long enough, I won't have to buy your book. So, one more question. Monosodium glutamate. My understanding is that got a bad reputation from a single letter to the editor in the New England Journal about Chinese food syndrome. What's your opinion of that, and monosodium glutamate, or even Chinese food in general?
So you can argue it's either harmless or you can argue it's beneficial. The harmless data is that it really does seem to be harmless. Even people that claim to have this kind of Chinese restaurant syndrome or claim to have problems, you blind people to MSG, they can't tell the difference. But you can argue it's beneficial because by MSG you can cut down on sodium intake. So particularly the elderly, we actually lose our sense of taste, mostly because it's actually a loss of smell, not the loss of taste, such that as we grow older, one of the reasons the blood pressure skyrockets is we actually add more salt to food to get the same salty taste in our mouths. And we can actually reduce the amount of salt we're using various flavor enhancers, one of which is MSG. And so there's all these trials where you can use MSG to lower people's blood pressures. It's not that MSG is helping, it's just kind of allowing people to use less salt to get the same kind of salty taste.
Okay, just a question on, trying to make sure patients aren't getting like vitamin deficiencies on this diet. I know, ideally they would be getting in a good, well-balanced plant-based diet, but most of my patients are not going to do this much research into a plant-based diet. So are there like common nutritional deficiencies, certain vitamins you'd recommend?
So glad you brought that up. There are 2 vitamins that are not made by plants. One is vitamin D, which is made by animals such as ourselves when we walk outside, the sunshine vitamin. However, some people work indoors, live indoors, don't get enough sunshine, institutionalized, whatever, and so may need to take a vitamin D supplement or consume vitamin D fortified foods. The only other vitamin not made by plants is vitamin B12. It's not made by animals either. It's made by little microbes that blanket the earth. So we used to get, B12 drinking out of a mountain stream or well water or something, but now we chlorinate the water supply to kill off any bacteria. So we don't get a lot of B12 in our water anymore, don't get a lot of cholera either. It's a good thing that we live in a nice, modern, sanitary world, but we do need to get some source of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 grows in the guts of some animals and diffuses into their bloodstream. Actually, we have B12 producing bacteria in our colon, but it's too far down, unfortunately, to be absorbed. And they discovered that by giving grad students, you can make and you can up their B12 by giving them sterilized aliquots of their own feces. But too low, unfortunately, to be absorbed. So we need to get a regular, reliable source of vitamin B12. Our fellow great apes get all the B12 they need eating bugs, dirt, and feces. I prefer supplements. Or B12 fortified foods. There's a lot of foods that have B12 added to it. But if you're not eating a lot of fortified foods, a lot of which are processed, like breakfast cereals, etc., I encourage people to take vitamin B12. Simplest is probably 2,000 microgram of cyanocobalamin, which is the most shelf-stable version. Costs $5, less than $5 a year. Get all the B12 you want. Critically important, particularly for those over the age 50. In fact, the National Academies of Medicine, which determines the RDAs, et cetera, says everyone over the age 50 needs to take a B12 supplement, period, regardless of what you eat, just because our bodies aren't very good at as we get older, at kind of taking the B12 from animal products. And so basically, people eating plant-based diets just need to take that 50 and older. Everyone has to be on B12 recommendation. Earlier than that, particularly important for pregnant and breastfeeding women, since when people go plant-based, they have a store of B12 in their liver such they can go months, sometimes even years without running into B12 deficiency. But infants start out without those stores and can very rapidly develop a B12 deficiency if they're not getting a regular, reliable source of B12 through the breast milk, which has to come from somewhere in that person, in the mom's diet. So there's also daily dosing. I've got lots of videos on B12, but critically important for anyone, even eating kind of a predominantly plant-based diet, you need to get your B12.
Can you comment on omega-3s? Because in your book, I think there was something about omega-3s not being recommended. And then also, what about algal oil for omega-3s?
So there's two kinds of essential fats, omega-3s and omega-6s. We actually have to get into our diets. And there's fascinating series of experiments how we figure that out, and I'll leave that to the videos. Omega-6 is found widely throughout the food, so the problem is actually getting too many omega-6s rather than too little. But omega-3s are concentrated in just a few sources. There's short-chain omega-3s, the alpha-linolenic acid found predominantly in flax seeds, walnuts, hemp seeds. That's the reason. One of the reasons I encourage people to eat a tablespoon of ground flax seeds a day to get those short-chain omega-3 fatty acids, which our bodies then can elongate into the long-chain so-called fish fats like EPA and DHA. The question is, can our body do that efficiently enough for optimal brain health? Omega-3s really isn't about heart at this point. The latest Cochrane review says basically there's no benefit to taking fish oil or dietary advice to eat fish in terms of heart health, but for long-term cognitive health, particularly older men who may not have the same kind of capacity of elongating the short-chain fatty acids because they don't have to grow a brain in their uterus. That I encourage people to consider 250 milligrams of preformed DHA you can get from a pollutant-free source like algae oil, which is where the fish get it from in the first place. These are essential fats, meaning our body can make them. Fish can't make them either. But so they have to get all their long-chain omega-3s from the bottom of the food chain from these golden algae, and we can get it ourselves, and so we don't have to worry about mercury and toxic species. Oh, we have another one. Okay. Thank you. Hello. Okay. Back in business. So tablespoon of ground flax every day, and consider a preformed source of DHA for brain health, particularly the elderly and particularly for older men. And thank you so much, everyone.